think we figured this out now. Good to see you all. Let's see, do I have anybody here who needs papers that I have papers for? Jace, Sabrina. This has all of your things for the rest of the. Okay. Let's see. Is your brother here? Oh, okay. Christian, correct? Yeah, you might have to put all those in. Okay. This front page is like, goes in the front of it. Yeah, so it doesn't have. Okay? All right, let me get this fixed and we're going to get going. Sorry, to get the recording going. All right, so, I have to turn it down. It's too loud. Test. Is that better? Test. Okay. Whew. All right, so we have been learning the books of the Bible. We have gotten up, we were in the New Testament. We have gotten through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and 1st and 2nd Timothy. These are letters that were written, 2 letters that were written to some people who were in the town of Thessalonica, and a guy named Timothy got 2 letters as well. So let's see if we can sing this song all the way up through what would be 1st and 2nd Timothy. Ready? Here we go. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Timothy. Okay, good. We've gotten up through Timothy. Now we're going to learn the next 4. Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, and James. Those are 4 letters. So we're going to go, and it ends nicely with the song on this. So we're going to go up Timothy, Titus, and Philemon, Hebrews, and then James. All right, listen to that again. And Timothy, there's 2 of those. Timothy, Titus, and Philemon, Hebrews, and then James. All right, let's start with Matthew. Here we go. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Titus, and Philemon, Hebrews, and then James. Let's finish it. Peter, John, Jude, Revelation, ends the Word of God. All right, as a reminder, we are, I'm going to sit on the table here. We are here in Florida. This table doesn't feel secure. We're here in Florida. If we were to go across the Atlantic Ocean, we would get to the continent of, all right, you're going to have to yell it louder because you have mask over your faces. Africa. What's this body of water above Africa? All right, what's the body of water that looks like an arm with 2 fingers? Red Sea. What is this body of water right here? Persian Gulf. All right, and the little dot on the side of the Mediterranean Sea is the special land where Jesus was. It was Canaan. Later it was called Israel. Then it was called various names. Then the Romans called it Palestine. And now it's back to being Israel again. So this black box here is the land of the Old Testament. The red box is the land of the New Testament. If we zoomed into the black box, the land of the Old Testament, here we have the Mediterranean Sea. This is the top of Africa. This is the nation of Egypt, Red Sea, Persian Gulf. Here's that special land we're talking about. We know that somewhere in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, God placed the first man and woman. So we kind of talked about, I don't have my globe up here, so imagine you have the globe here. I just forgot it. So we talked about the creation era. And the 4 things we need to remember is that God created everything. But what's the fall? What do we mean by the fall?
When Adam and Eve sinned.
All right, when Adam and Eve sinned, and that brought sin into the world. And because of that, we have all been born with that sin nature, that just natural. It naturally comes to us to rebel against God and want to do our own thing. So then we have the story of the flood, the Tower of Babel. At the Tower of Babel, people were rebelling against God. So God confused their languages, and they spread out into different, what's the key word? Nations. All right? They spread out into different nations. Now, in the story, because remember we said this is really all one big long story. So in the story, God decided, or he already knew in his plan, in his mind, he was going to start a nation of his own. We call this the patriarchs era. The word patriarchs just means father, like a founding father or the father of a family. So he said, I am going to make a nation of my own. All of these nations that have split off, none of them trusted in the Lord. None of them. They all had their own idols. They all, did their own thing. And so he says, I'm going to make a nation, and this nation is going to be mine, and they will trust in me, hopefully. And as they're trusting in me, Emily, sorry, she's doing it. Never mind. Yeah, closing the door. As they're trusting in me, maybe other nations will notice, and other nations will know who I am. So he started with a man named Abraham. He said, Abraham, I want you to go over to this land, and I'm going to begin a nation with you. You're going to follow me. You're going to have this land, and your nation will be a blessing to all the other nations. So Abraham went, and we're going to kind of zoom in on this special land right here. So there's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea. So we zoom into that section right here. So there's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's the land of Canaan, which is what it was called when Abraham went there. Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. When Abraham went there, the first place that we know that he stopped was a city called Shechem, all right? The reason I'm bringing this up is because it will come up, or this area is going to come up in our story in the New Testament today. So he went to Shechem, and he built an altar, and he worshiped the Lord, and the Lord said, yes, I will indeed make you into a great nation, and look around, this is the land I will give to that nation. And they will be a blessing to all the other nations. And we know that that was a clue that the Savior was going to come from this nation and from this land. So Abraham believed. God said, okay, you're righteous because you believe. That's what he had to do. He just had to believe. And he obeyed God because he believed. And then Abraham had a son named Isaac. God said the same thing to Isaac. Isaac, yes, you're going to be the father of this great nation. I'm passing this promise down to you. Isaac had a son named Jacob. God said to Jacob, I'm passing this down to you. I'm passing this promise to you. You're going to be the father of this great nation. I'm going to give you this land. Other people are going to know who I am because of you, because of your nation. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. That's why the nation was called Israel, not the Jacobians or whatever, Jacobites. Jacob has 12 sons, and we start the family. The family's going to start to grow now. Interesting thing about Jacob is at one point, as his family is starting to grow, and he's got all these sheep, and he's pretty wealthy, he moves to the area around Shechem for a while. And so when he gets to Shechem, Shechem is a city. It probably has a wall around it, has a king that lives there. And he asked the king if he could buy some land just outside of Shechem. He needed water, right? The land of Israel didn't have a ton of water everywhere. Couldn't go to Publix and get bottles of water. They didn't have delivery trucks that brought water coolers to their house, and they just didn't have a lot of water. So he has all these sheep that he's got to give water to, and so he asked the king of Shechem if he can buy some land. So the king says, yes, you can buy this little plot of land, and Jacob digs a well. So if you were to look at this is another kind of map of Shechem. This would be the city of Shechem, and there's these two mountains on either side of Shechem. One was called Mount Ebal, and one was called Mount Gerizim. And it was right outside of this area that Jacob dug his well. Here's a more recent picture of the town that's there now. So this is Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, and in between those two mountains was the city of the town of Shechem. So somehow, and I don't know how Jacob did it, he dug really, really deep into the ground, down below the dirt and everything to where there was some water way down deep, and he built this well. He dug this well. And this well was very, very good well. In fact, we'll find out today it was still a functioning well when Jesus came along 2,000 years later. It's still a functioning well today. So this is 4,000 years after Jacob dug the well. Now, if you were to go today to Israel and see it, I don't know, has anybody been there, seen it? There's a little building over it. It's like a tourist attraction. exactly the same as back in Jacob's day or even Jesus' day. But it was a really good well because it's still functioning now 4,000 years later. Now, if you wanted the best water you could get in Israel, the best water isn't even a well. The best water would be if you went up like the top of a mountain that has lots of snow or a spring, a natural spring that comes out and bubbles out, and where the snow or the water would flow down into a stream down the mountain. That's the best water you could get. That would be the purest, cleanest water. In fact, in Bible times, they would call that living water. And alongside the streams would be lots of plants and things growing because this water gave life. And to drink that water, that's the best water, the healthiest water you could drink back in those days. But they couldn't find it very, very many places. They didn't have a lot of huge, tall mountains that, these mountains over here were just small. They didn't have a lot of natural springs. They didn't have a lot of living water, good fresh water that they could drink. So they had to dig wells. So Jacob dug this well. Many years later, Jacob and his family had to move down to Egypt, and they're down in Egypt for a while. They have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and pretty soon there's like 1 million or more of them. And they're down there for 400 years, and God says, no, it's time to bring you out. It's time to keep this promise to Abraham. I'm going to take you back to the land and give that land to you. And if you know the story of Moses, and they get out, and the Red Sea and all that, they get out, and God says, before you go into the land, I'm going to make a covenant with you. We're going to make a deal here. God says, I will keep my promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to you guys, you descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but you have to also keep my rules and keep my laws. And so they said, yes, your rules are good. We believe that you're going to be our God. You're going to drive out our enemies. You're going to help us. So we will trust in you and we will obey you. And so they go into the promised land. But what happens? They break the covenant over and over again. They don't trust the Lord. They worship other gods. They get really, really awful. And at that point, you think, well, God could have just said, fine, you didn't keep the covenant, so I don't have to keep my side of the covenant. But God still has to keep his covenant to Abraham. So he still has to give them the land, and the Savior still has to be born from this nation in that land. And so God raises up a very faithful leader to be their king. His name was David. And David kind of brings everybody back to the Lord. Why this isn't working? Okay. He sets up his capital here in Jerusalem, and he brings people back to the Lord, and the Lord is so pleased with David's life, so he makes a covenant with David. David, you're going to have descendants sit on your throne, and one of your descendants is going to sit on your throne forever. So now we have another clue. When the Savior comes, he also has to be a descendant of David and these kings that are going to come from David. So David dies. His son Solomon becomes king. Solomon builds this beautiful temple, this house of the Lord there in Jerusalem. But by the end of Solomon's life, he's worshiping idols. That's like the number one thing you're not supposed to do. He's worshiping idols. He's trusting other gods. And so God says, okay, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. Oh, not all the kingdom, because I did promise to your father David that his descendants would sit on the throne, but I'm going to take part of the kingdom away from you. And sure enough, the kingdom split in two. The people up here are like, you know what? We don't want David's descendants to be our kings. We want to do our own thing. We don't want to belong to the people down here. So the kingdom split in two. And you had this part up here, which was still called Israel, and you had this part down here called Judah. And the kings of David's descendants, stayed king down here in Judah with their capital in Jerusalem. The other kings of Israel, they were Israelites, just random kings. One would kill another king and all this stuff. This king and then that king. And their capital was Samaria. The problem with these kings is that they always were against the Lord. They decided from the very start, we're just going to worship idols. You don't worship the Lord anymore. You don't go down to the temple in Jerusalem anymore. We're just going to worship idols. And for the most part, the people went along with it. Now, God warned them. And he sent prophets, and the word of the Lord came to them. And some of their most famous prophets were Elijah, and the guy who came after him was Elisha, and other prophets like Jonah and Hosea, other prophets that came to them and warned them and warned them and warned them, and they never would listen. Doesn't mean that there wasn't anybody here that worshiped the Lord, but for the most part, they were worshiping idols. So after many, many, many years, maybe 150 or so years, God said, okay, enough. I have warned you. I have disciplined you. You have not come back to me. I'm going to take you out of the land. God's land. He decides who lives where on the whole planet Earth. So he raised up these bad people up here in the nation of Assyria, and they started getting strong, and they started conquering all these other nations and all these cities, and God allowed them to come in and conquer this top part, to conquer the northern part, the nation of Israel, conquered them, took them out of the land, scattered them into all these other places that they had conquered, left some of them there, but for the most part, they scattered them around. Then they took people from all these other places and brought some of them in here, into this area that it used to be the nation of Israel. So those people that came from other lands, they're not Jewish people, they're not Israelite people. What do we call people who aren't Jewish? Gentiles, all right? How many people here are not Jewish? I know we have a few that are. I'm not. So that would make us Gentiles, right? So all these Gentiles came in to the land and started mixing with the few Jewish people, the few Israelite people that were left. And when they came, they brought their idols, and they brought their weird worship practices that were totally against what the Lord would have them do. And they started moving in and living with the Israelites that were there. And the Israelites weren't very good at worshiping the Lord anyway. But the Israelites knew, okay, our God, his name is Yahweh, and we know we're supposed to worship him, and we kind of try, and we do sort of. And so these other people came with their gods. And what happened is as they mixed together and they married together, they kind of had a big old mishmash of all these different things that they were worshiping. So yeah, they're worshiping Yahweh sort of, but they're also worshiping all these other idols and all these other gods. Eventually, Judah did the same thing. This part of the kingdom did the same thing. They worshiped idols. They weren't worshiping the Lord. So the Lord sent another group of people, the Babylonians. They came and attacked Judah and took them out. Destroyed the beautiful temple, destroyed the city of Jerusalem, took these people away. After a few years, it was no longer Babylon that was ruling everything. It was this country over here called Persia. Persia took care over all of this stripy part, including this area here. But the king of Persia said, listen, Jewish people, Israelite people, if you would like to go back to Judah, to Jerusalem, and rebuild your temple, I will allow you to do that. If you want to go back and worship your God in your city and rebuild his house, you are allowed to do that. Now, I still will control you. I still own this area, but I will allow you to go back. We talked about this before. So some of them went back. Do you remember what the funny name of the guy who was the leader who took them back? Started with a Z. Zerubbabel, right? A descendant of David's kingly line. So he comes back and he helps them. They start working on the temple. Well, the people that lived here, this mixed group of people that was kind of a mishmash, and they worship idols, and they kind of sort of worshiped the God Yahweh sort of in different ways. They see Zerubbabel and these Jews come back to Jerusalem, and they see that Zerubbabel's rebuilding this temple to Yahweh, and they come to Zerubbabel and say, hey, can we join you? Can we help you? We'd like to, be part of this worship of Yahweh. And Zerubbabel says, no, you worship all these other gods. You do all these weird things in your worship that we're not supposed to do, and you're not following the Lord. And hey, that's what got them in the trouble in the first place. That's why they all got taken out of the land, because they were worshiping all these idols and doing all these other things. So he said, no, you have no part with us. You are not allowed to help us. You're not allowed to worship with us. You worship all these other gods too. You are not bringing that into our temple area. So how do you think the people responded to that? They didn't like it. They didn't like that at all. As more and more Jews came into the area and started rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, these people got angrier and angrier. And the Jews are like, listen, you don't really worship the Lord the right way. And you're worshiping other gods. You can't worship with us. And that made them really, really angry. So by the time you get to Jesus' day, you have a group of people living in this area right here that are very, very much enemies of the Jews that live here and here. One other thing that they did, they said, listen, if you're not going to let us come and worship in your temple, if we can't worship Yahweh there, we're going to build our own temple. We're going to Mount Gerizim. This is a special place. Jacob's well and all. After Jacob was one of our ancestors, because some of them kind of come from him. We are going to go to Mount Gerizim, and we're going to build our own temple. So, So they built a temple there. Well, sometime in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Jewish leader down in Jerusalem said, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't build another temple to the Lord. The law says there's only one temple, only one place where the sacrifices can be made, only one place you can worship, and that is at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. You can't just build another temple to Yahweh. You can't do that. And he came and tore it down. You think that helped matters? So what they're saying is, you worship other gods, so we won't let you worship in our temple. We won't let you come and worship Yahweh in our temple because you worship other gods. You're doing things you're not supposed to do. At the same time, they're saying, and you can't build your own temple. So you can't worship God anywhere else either. So basically, Samaritan people who live in Samaria, in that area, you are out of luck. You can't worship the Lord. We just, you're not one of us. You worship other gods. So that didn't make them very happy. They put an altar back up here, and they kept worshiping Yahweh the best they knew how, and also worshiping other gods and doing weird things. But that's what things were like by the time Jesus came along. So you had a whole group of people here that were very mad at people here. And the Jews that lived here and here felt like the Samaritans that lived here were unclean according to the law. They weren't fit to come and worship with them. And, God would have nothing to do. Certainly he would have nothing to do with those people there. So this is kind of where our story is going to get going. Remember last week we said that Jesus was in the city of Cana. That's where he did his first miracle. Do you remember what that first miracle was? All right, turned water into wine. His first miracle there in Cana. Then they went down to Jerusalem. I don't know if they went down through Samaria or not. That would be the quickest way, right? But traveling through Samaria wasn't really pleasant for the Jewish people, especially if they were going to go down to worship at the temple and celebrate at one of their holidays. So imagine you're a Samaritan and you're living here, and these Jewish people are coming through, and they want to stay in your house or stay in your town or eat some of your food, and you know where they're going. They're going to go down and worship in the temple that they say, you are not welcome. You can't come to our temple. But hey, would you let us stay in your house as we're traveling down there? So they really weren't nice to the Jews who were traveling through here. And the Jews weren't nice to them back. So it wasn't a pleasant journey to travel through Samaria. In fact, some people would say, I'm not going to go through Samaria at all. The Samaritans are unclean. I'm going to cross the Jordan River, go through this section of the Decapolis, go down through Perea, cross the Jordan River, and then go to Jerusalem that way. Some people would just go around it altogether. So we don't know if Jesus went down through Samaria or if they went around. We said last week they went to Jerusalem. He had a talk with Nicodemus. Remember, Nicodemus was coming to find out who he really was, and he gave Nicodemus that wonderful verse that we always quote, for God so loved the world. He gave his only son, his one and only son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. So he had this wonderful conversation with Nicodemus. He also went into the temple area. It was Passover holiday. And remember, they were selling all these animals, and it was just like a big marketplace and a big zoo, literally, right here, right in front of the temple area. And what did he do? He wove together a cord, and he drove them all out. He said, this is a house of prayer. This is my Father's house. You're making it into a marketplace. And you could say, well, did he just lose his temper? No. He knows this represents God's presence among them. And he wants them to come and just like, I'm close to God. Look how close I can be to God. I'm going up to God's presence. Hey, religious leaders, you should be clearing the way and making it easy for people to get there. And the religious leaders were setting up all these barriers. And so he's like, clear the way, let them go. And do you remember that the Gentiles could only go up to that little wall right there? And if they wanted to worship the Lord, they couldn't go all the way in, but they could at least go that far and worship the Lord. And if there's all this stuff in the way, they can't hear the worship that's going on, and they can't listen to the priest's prayers and all that. So Jesus was like, get out of the way and let people come to my Father. Let people come to my Father's house. Well, after that, Jesus down in Jerusalem, he says to his disciples, we are going to head back north, time to go back up to Galilee. We must go through Samaria. Got to go through Samaria. Okay, here we go. So they start traveling, and as they're walking along, they get up to this town called Sychar. Well, where is Sychar? You see the little Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim there? Sychar was the New Testament city that had once been Shechem in the Old Testament. All right? Shechem had gotten destroyed. It got rebuilt. So in the New Testament, it was called Sychar. So Jesus and his disciples get to Sychar, and they're hungry, and they're tired. And he's a human, and he's tired, and he's hungry as well. So he goes and he sits down. And you know where he sits down? He sits down at Jacob's well. And he's thirsty. But he doesn't have a pot to tie onto the rope that he can lower in and get water. So he has no way of getting water out of that well. And he's thirsty. So he's sitting there at Jacob's well 2,000 years after Jacob dug it. And the disciples are like, well, we're going to go into town and see if we can buy some food. Let's see if these Samaritans will at least take our money and sell us some food. So the disciples go off into town, and Jesus stays there by himself. All right, it's the middle of the day. Jesus is sitting here, and out from the town of Sychar comes this woman, a Samaritan woman with her pot. She's going out to draw water from the well. Now, most of the women would have come out early in the morning, probably all together. They're probably walking out and like, oh, you should have seen what my kid did the other day. It was so funny. And they're laughing, and they're all with their friends, and they'd come get the water that they need for the family and take it back home for the day. But this woman didn't go out with the rest of the women. This woman had a reputation for not being a very decent woman. She was not a very good woman. She was a sinful woman. And so she probably didn't have that many friends. And so she's going to go out there by herself on her own time. So she goes out there in the middle of the day. Just so happens, there's Jesus sitting beside the well as she's heading out. Now, there's two things she probably would have thought of when she saw him. First of all, obviously he's a man. And back in those days, not today, back in those days, men tended to think that they were much better than women, right? We don't think that now, right? Back in those days, especially Jewish men, unbelievably, they thought, God blessed us more, and then he made women and children were the worst. But they'll grow up, But women, they're just not as special as we are. In fact, some rabbis would be like, it's a waste of time to teach women about the scriptures. That's just a waste of time. We will see that Jesus didn't think that way at all. But she sees there's a man, Jewish man there sitting there. So she would have thought, okay, he's not going to talk to me because I'm a woman. Jewish men wouldn't just go chat with women that weren't their wives. Say, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, how are you doing? Good to see you. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't stoop down that low to talk to a woman. That's their feelings. The second thing she would realize is he's a Jewish man. Jews don't talk to Samaritans. Samaritans are unclean. Samaritans are so far beneath the Jews. So I'm just going to go get my water, and I'm just going to go back, and I'm just going to do my own thing, and just ignore this man that's sitting there. So she goes and starts to draw water out of the well. And Jesus says to her, he speaks to her, he says, give me a drink. Now, as you're reading this at home and through the scriptures, in this passage, notice how many times the word give or gift or giving is in there. Maybe circle that. But he says to her, give me a drink. Well, she's shocked that he would even talk to her. I mean, he's speaking to me. And she says that. She says, how is it that you, being a Jewish man, would ask me for a drink of water? I mean, not only was she a Samaritan woman, but to drink out of her water pot, most Jews would say, that's unclean. I can't do that. Not dirty, but ceremonially, according to the law, according to their stand with God, that will make me unclean if I drink the water from their pot. So she's like, how is it that you, being a Jewish man, that you would ask me for a drink of water? I mean, She's amazed he would even speak to her. And he said, if you knew the gift of God, and if you knew who it was that is asking you for a drink, you would have asked me, and I would have given you living water. Oh, that's the best kind of water. That's that fresh water from the mountain. They don't have that there. So she's like, okay, you don't even have a jug. You don't have a water pot to put down in the well, and the well is very deep. So where do you get living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well that's still going on 2,000 years later? Are you better than him? I mean, he dug this well, and we're still getting good water out of it. Jesus says, well, everybody who drinks out of this well is going to get thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water I will give him will become in him a spring of water that will well up to eternal life. Now, is he talking about literal water? No. Did we talk to Nicodemus? He says, oh, you must be born again. Nicodemus is like, how do I shrink back up and get inside my mom? And how do I? It wasn't saying literally your body, you have to be born again. He's speaking spiritually. He's trying to get Nicodemus to think spiritually. All right, so he's not saying, I can give you a drink of water, and if you drink it, you'll never get thirsty again, you'll have eternal life. But he's speaking spiritually, but she doesn't understand that yet. So she says, sir, give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty, I'll never have to come back to this well again. She doesn't quite get it. But he says to her, go back, get your husband, and bring him back here. And she said, well, why? I don't have a husband. She says, he said, you're telling me the truth. You're absolutely right. You don't have a husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, Jesus said, and the man you're living with right now is not your husband. You're telling me the truth. Kind of like giving her a compliment and a dig at the same time. You're living in sin because you're living with a man you're not married to, and you've had 5 husbands, so things aren't going well with you, probably because she was sinful. Hey, but you are telling me the truth, you know? So it probably bothered her that he brought up her sinful life. But what amazed her even more was, how did he know that? He doesn't know me. He hasn't been here before. How did he know that? So she's like, this guy must be like a prophet or something. So she said, sir, I can see that you must be a prophet. And there's something that's probably been bothering her, because she has a question for him that she must have thought of again and again and again. I imagine as she's walking out to Jacob's well, and she's looking at Mount Gerizim, where they used to have a temple for worshiping Yahweh, and now they have an altar there. And I imagine she's thought this over many times, because she's ready with this question. And she's like, who can answer this question for me? So she says, I think you're probably a prophet. So I'm going to ask you this question. You know, our ancestors said, we're supposed to worship Yahweh on Mount Gerizim right here. But you Jewish people say that, no, you can only worship the Lord, you can only worship Yahweh at the temple in Jerusalem. That's what your law says. So which is it? Where are we supposed to worship? Where can I worship Yahweh? Where can I go? Where's it? Because you won't let me go down here. And if I'm not supposed to worship here, is there no hope for this woman to be able to worship Yahweh? Basically, the Jews had given them no hope. So she's saying, what is it? Where is the right place to worship? And he says to her, woman, believe me, the time is coming very soon when you will not worship the Father, he calls him the Father, either on this mountain or in Jerusalem. He says, you know, you try to worship the Lord, but you don't really know about him, because salvation comes from the Jews. I would say salvation is only for the Jews, but it's going to come from the Jews. You don't really understand it, but he said, but soon, even now, true worshipers of the Father will worship him in spirit and in truth, not in a certain place. For the Father is looking for people like this to worship him. He's looking for people who want to really worship him, who truly want to worship him. Do you think she could be included in that? Is he looking for her? Is she one of these people that could worship him in spirit and in truth? He said, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in their spirits and worship in truth, knowing and believing the truth of who he is. Hey, one day it's not going to matter where you are. That's why we don't have to travel to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. There's no temple there anyway. We can worship the Lord on our own, at home, wherever we are, because we can worship him from the Spirit that's inside of us as we believe. And she's listening to this, and she wants to understand. She's still a little confused, and she said, well, I know there's a Messiah coming. I heard there's a Messiah coming, and when he comes, he's going to set us straight with all this. He's going to tell us all these things that we need to know. He turns and looks at her, and he says, I who am speaking to you am he. I'm the Messiah. You know, he hasn't come right out and said that to anybody. He hasn't even come out and said that to the Jewish people yet. He hasn't walked around saying, I'm the Messiah. Here I am. I'm the Messiah. Because probably they would have said, fine, would you get an army together and get rid of these Romans for us, and then you can sit on David's throne. That's not what he came for. And he goes to this woman who's like, oh, he's not even going to speak to me. He says, I who am speaking to you, I'm that Messiah you're looking for. How special is that? Here she is, a woman, a Samaritan, even a sinful Samaritan. Even for Samaritans, she was sinful. And he's telling her flat out, you're looking for it? Here I am. And she's so excited. And she's like, I got to tell somebody. I got to go back and tell. Just stay here. I got to go tell. So she runs back to the town. And as she's heading back to town to tell everybody, the disciples are heading out from town. They've gotten some food. And they've seen that Jesus is sitting over there by that well talking to a Samaritan woman. Why would he do that? But they don't say anything. They're just like, okay, whatever. So they get up to Jesus, and before we get to that part, she's run home. She's run back to Sychar, and she's telling everybody, listen, you wouldn't believe it. I saw this man, and they're probably like, who's this woman? This woman, we know her. He said, no, listen, he told me everything about myself, even the bad stuff, even the sinful thing. He's told me everything about myself, and he says he's the Messiah, and I think it really could be. And do you think this is the one? You've got to come and see. And they're like, what? And they're listening to her, and they're thinking, maybe this is the Messiah. We need to go and see. So the whole town gets together and says, let's go out and find out. She's like, oh, come and see. I think this is the Messiah. Or they think this is the Christ. The word Christ just means Messiah, same thing. So they start heading out to Jacob's well. And the disciples have gone up to Jesus, and they're like, well, we've got some food. Those Samaritans over in Sychar agreed to sell us some food, so here's some food you need to eat. Why don't you have something to eat? And Jesus says, I have some food that you don't know anything about. Did that lady bring him a sandwich or something? Or where did he get the food? Where did you get? He's not talking about literal food. He says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish the work that I was sent to do. And they're like, okay. And he said, listen, they're probably looking around he says, look around at the fields. There's probably some fields of wheat all around them. Just look around at these fields. You would look at these wheat fields and say, okay, the wheat's not very high. You would say there's probably 4 more months of growth until the harvest will be ready. Like 4 more months, and then it's time to harvest the wheat. And they're like, yeah, about 4 more months. Yeah, just starting. Jesus says, I tell you, the harvest is ready now. I wonder if the disciples were like, doesn't look ready to me. I think if we cut it now, wouldn't have a very good crop. What is he talking about? He says, the harvest is ready now. Look around you. It's ready now. The grain is ready to be gathered. They're looking. It doesn't look like that grain's ready to be gathered. And as they're looking, what do you think they see? What do you think they see as they're looking? What's coming towards them? Yeah, the Samaritans from Sychar. They're coming out to him. He's not talking about literal grain that you're going to go harvest and eat. He's talking about the people. And they're coming out. Let's see who Jesus is. Let's find out, is this Messiah? We want to know him. And Jesus says to them, one person plants, another person cuts the wheat and brings it in, and they both get the reward. He said, I'm sending you now to gather the wheat somebody else has planted. The disciples did not go into Sychar and say, hey, we need some food. Would you sell us some food? And by the way, the Messiah is out there, and you need to see him. Why don't you come out and see the Messiah? You would love to meet the Messiah. Come with us. They weren't doing that. These are Samaritans. The Messiah is not here for the Samaritans. They just went to buy food. They didn't go out there to try to get the go to Sychar to try to get the Samaritans to come and see Jesus. They didn't plant any seeds there. But Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman. She had heard something from prophets or whatever. She knew that there was a Messiah coming. And he told her, and she ran back and told her people, and now they're coming. And he's basically saying, I'm going to let you in on this. Somebody else did all the work. Now I'm going to let you get the harvest. You're going to see this. And so they all come running out to Jesus and talking to him and listening to him. And they said, when we first heard the woman talk, we believed her. But now that we've heard you talk, we really believe. We believe that you are the Savior of, not the Jews, you're the Savior of the world. Even us Samaritans, we think you're here for us. Would you come and stay with us? And Jesus says, yes, I'll go to your town. So Jesus and his disciples went and stayed with these Samaritans for a couple of days, spent some time with them. And this little group of Samaritans that lived here in the city of Sychar believed him. Now, they didn't understand the whole story. They didn't know he was going to go die on a cross for their sins. But they did believe that this was the Messiah from the Jewish nation, but not just for the Jewish nation. So after a couple of days there, he and his disciples head back up to the region of Galilee, and they go back to Cana. Remember, Cana is where he had turned the water to wine. So they go back up to Cana, and when he's there was a city official who was from Capernaum, down here. I say down because it was down some mountains. There's from Capernaum right here, and his son was very, very ill. His son was dying. There was no hope. The doctors couldn't do anything for his son. Now, we don't know if it was a Jewish city official or a Roman Gentile city official. We just don't know. But he hears that Jesus is in Cana. And he knows that Jesus has done miracles, and he knows Jesus, that's his only hope. So it's about 20 miles, and he runs to Cana as fast as he can. It took him 8 hours or so. And he finds Jesus, and he falls down on his knees, and he says, please, sir, come quickly. Please come to my home in Capernaum. My son is very sick. He's dying. Please hurry and come before he dies. Now, I imagine there's probably a crowd of people around Jesus. Remember, he had turned the water to wine. Ooh, we're going to see another miracle. Maybe we'll all go to Capernaum. Yes, it's going to be a miracle. We're going to see this. It's going to be great. And Jesus says, in response to this man, he says, unless you, and that word you didn't mean just him. That word you is plural, so he means the people that are watching him. He says, unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. Unless you see all these things happen, you won't believe. They've already seen the water turn to wine. Unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. Well, the man is just like, please come to my house. Please hurry. Please come to my house. And Jesus looks at him. Jesus isn't going to go to his house. He looks at him and he says, go. Your son will live. Now, the man could have been like, now you've got to come. You got to come to my house and put your hands on and say some magical thing. You got to be there. You got to come. Or he could have said, can't you at least just stand up and say some big magical thing and face Capernaum? And I can't just leave. I mean, you can't just go, your son will live. I mean, that man could have said that. But the man had a little edge of faith inside of him, and he takes off. And he heads home. And I imagine the crowd were kind of like, that's it? We don't get to see anything? And for some reason, Jesus was like, I'm not doing a show out of this. This is just go, your son will live. So as he's heading home, his servants come out to the man, and the servants are saying, oh, it's so great news. Your son is well. Your son's doing great. He's like, what time did he start getting better? And they gave him the time. He's like, it's the exact time that Jesus said your son will live. And so the man, of course, is like, I believe it. I believe him. He's the one. And he tells his family, and they're all going to believe too. But I imagine the people in Cana, the rest of the crowd, they didn't get to see what really happened. But for this man, he's like, you know what? He didn't even have to be here. He didn't have to touch my son. He could just think it. He could just say it. Who does that? God, right? So Jesus is kind of starting to show he's not just a man. He's not just a man that God uses to do miracles. He's God. After that, Jesus and his disciples go to Nazareth, right near Cana. Nazareth, that's his hometown. Going to go see his hometown group, the people that he grew up with. And he gets into town, and the people are like, oh, Jesus, nice to have you back. We hear you've been a rabbi or a teacher. Even God's even done some miracles through you. Why don't you be our teacher, our rabbi for Sabbath this week? Come into the synagogue and you can be our teacher. Nice to have a hometown boy be our teacher. So Jesus goes in there and they give him a scroll. And the scroll is from the prophet Isaiah. And it was written 700 to 800 years before Christ was born, BC. And so Jesus opens up the scroll to a certain spot and he reads this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Closes up the scroll. Oh, they've heard this before. So they know, like most rabbis, this is what they would say. They would say, okay, this is Isaiah. He's not talking about himself. Isaiah is not saying, I'm the one that the Lord has chosen to do all these things. Isaiah is saying, when the Messiah comes, this is what he's going to do. So Isaiah is prophesying. He's telling the people, this is what Messiah is going to be like. This is what Messiah is going to say. And so probably they're expecting Jesus to say, as Isaiah is talking about the Messiah, and won't it be a wonderful thing when the Messiah comes and does these things? That's not what Jesus said. He rolls up the scroll and he says, today, this is being fulfilled. This scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Huh? When Jesus spoke, he wasn't harsh. He wasn't angry. His words were beautiful. I mean, just listening to him, he was gracious. He was kind. People loved to listen to him. But what's he saying here? Kind of sounds like, what does he mean this has been fulfilled? What's he talking about? Is he saying that certainly he's not saying that he's one of our hometown kids. He grew up here. Nazareth, tiny little town. No, the Messiah, he's going to come from Jerusalem or Bethlehem because David came there. He'll come from somewhere else and he'll be this conquering king. And you're just Jesus. You grew up here as a carpenter's son. Certainly, he would not dare try to say that he's the Messiah, would he? Because that's against the law. That's against the covenant. That's against the Jewish law. He could be stoned to death for saying that. Certainly he's not saying that, and Jesus knows what they're thinking. He knows they're starting to grumble. He knows they're starting to think, is he really claiming that he's the one Isaiah was talking about? Jesus? We know this guy. We know who his parents were. We know his brothers and sisters. And Jesus says to them, it's like that old saying, the prophet is accepted by other people, but he's not accepted by the people of his own town. People of his own town are like, you're not a prophet, you're just one of us. Prophets are special. We're just ordinary. And so they're not accepting him because he's just from their town. They just can't believe he could possibly be the one. And then he kind of refers to a couple stories in the Old Testament, and it doesn't make things better. It makes them even more angry. He says to them, your prophet Elijah, he's one of our favorites. Yeah, your prophet Elijah went and helped. God used him to help a widow back in his day. She wasn't a Jewish widow. She wasn't an Israelite widow. She was a Gentile widow. He said there were a lot of Jewish widows, but God sent Elijah to help this Gentile widow. What's he saying? What's the Jesus. And then he says, somebody needs to tell Jesus how to try to make everybody like him. He just didn't do a very good job with this one. He says, Elisha, somebody came to Elisha to get healed of leprosy. It was a man named Naaman. And Naaman was a Gentile. There were a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Israelite people who had leprosy. God didn't use Elisha to heal them. But this Gentile comes, and Elisha healed the Gentile. What point are you trying to make, Jesus? Almost sounds like you're saying God's going to help the Gentiles and not the Jews. Well, remember, Elijah and Elisha came to the Jewish people and warned them and begged them to come back to the Lord. Please come back to the Lord. Judgment's coming if you don't. Come back to the Lord. And they both pleaded with the people. And the Jewish people were like, no. Rejected their prophets. But God used these prophets to help a couple Gentiles out. What point is Jesus making? Well, I think if we look at the whole story of Jesus' life, we're going to see Jesus came to the Jews. He was a Jew. And he came to his own. Here he is in Nazareth, in his own hometown. And they're rejecting him. No, you're not the Messiah. We don't want you. We don't want to hear you. No, we don't believe you. And what's going to happen with the gospel? It's going to go to the Gentiles. That's why I know about it. I'm glad it came to me. I'm glad I get included in it. But the Jewish people, not all of them, his disciples believed him. His mother believed him. Later, his brothers would believe in him. But for the most part, the Jewish people would say, no, this isn't the Messiah we're looking for. No, we don't think this is the one. And they will reject him. But the gospel will go out to the Gentiles. The Bible tells us later, in our future, the Jewish people as a whole will come back and realize he really is the Messiah. It hasn't happened yet. There's some Jewish people that believe that. But as a whole, the Jewish people still don't understand that Jesus is really the Messiah. I think what Jesus is giving them a hint of is, look, my own people, my own town, if anybody should accept me, you guys know me. He never sinned as he was growing up. And you're not accepting me. You're rejecting me. The gospel's going to go to the Gentiles. Well, now they're so mad at him, and they're like, he has offended us, and he's claiming to be the Messiah, and he deserves to die. By the law, if you claim to be the Messiah and you're not, you deserve to die. So they take him out to the edge of the town where there's a cliff. And this is actually probably the actual place. There's a big valley here. This is the edge of the city of Nazareth, and there's a big cliff. And they're like, we are going to throw him off the cliff. And then they would probably throw stones on him and make sure he died. So they grab him and pull him to the edge of the cliff. Now, is God up there going, oh no, this isn't how he's supposed to die. What am I going to do? He's supposed to die on a cross. No, God's not panicking. Jesus walked away. What? He just walked away. Wait a minute, didn't they grab him and pull him to the edge of the cliff? How is it that he just walked away? I don't know. I'm going to ask about that when I get to heaven. I'm going to say, hey, Jesus, remember that time that you were in the... What happened? Did their hands... did they just drop you? Or what happened? I don't know. But he walked away and he left them. This wasn't a just, hey, see you later. I'm coming back. Talk to you later. He left them. Another place tells us he went to his hometown. They didn't believe him. And so he left. As far as we know, he didn't go back. They rejected him. You're not the one. You're not who we want. They tried to kill him. His own people, his own hometown people, his neighbors that he grew up with, probably some of his best friends. They tried to kill him. They rejected him. He left. He tried. They wouldn't listen to him. Now look at the two cities that we talked about today. Think about this. Nazareth versus Sychar. Sychar, Samaritans. They're unclean. They don't worship the Lord right. They're not welcome in the temple. We reject the Samaritans. Certainly the Messiah is not for the Samaritans. But this sinful Samaritan really wanted to know, what do I do? How do I worship Yahweh? I'm not allowed to go there. We're not supposed to have our own temple. What am I supposed to do? And Jesus reveals who he is to her. She believes it. I got to go tell people. She brings other people. They believe it. How many miracles did Jesus do to the people in Sychar? Did she come out and have this terrible disease and he healed her? Oh, he healed me of my diseases. The only thing that was pretty much of a miracle for her is he told her things about herself. How would he even know this? It was his words. She listened to what he said. They came back out and listened to him. She said, why would you speak to me? I'm speaking to you. And she listened, and she believed his words. And they all believed him. It doesn't say that he did any miracles, any signs and wonders. They just believed what he said. He goes up to Cana, and they're all like, oh, signs and wonders. He's like, if you don't see all these signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. You're not going to believe just on what I say, like the people of Sychar did. Then he goes to his own hometown. They didn't receive him. You're saying you're the Messiah? Seems to me that that's what you're saying. You didn't come right out and say it, but we pretty much see what you're trying to say here. You are not the Messiah. We reject you. His own people rejected him. The Samaritans received him. What's going to happen in the future? Eventually, most of his own people will reject him. And the gospel's going to go out to non-Jewish people. Not that no Jews, yes, many Jews will trust in him, but for the most part, most of them will not. So I think that's when you put these kind of things together and you look at this city versus that city and the response of the people that should have known him the best, the people that should have accepted him, and they didn't. They rejected him. And the ones that were like, they didn't really know that much about him, but they're seeking, they want to know the truth. And he comes out and says, I'm the one. We believe you. We believe your words. And we have his words. We have his words in the Word of God. And he speaks to us through his Spirit and through his Word. And we have the choice. Are we going to believe it or are we going to reject it? Now, if you just want to look at a couple little things, about, into the 1800s, so this would be about 120 years or so ago, somebody, when they first were coming out with cameras, somebody took a picture of this here. That was actually Jacob's well about 120 years ago. They were trying to get a bunch of money together so that they could build a little house over it, a tourist house. But it was still a functioning well. It's hard to see, but there were some women, this is back 100 and some years ago, would still come with pots on their head and go to the well. Then they built this little thing over it, but this is a Samaritan woman in 1900 going and getting water out of the well. And now I think the inside looks something like this. It's kind of more ornate, and you could go see it as a kind of a visitor's place to go, which I would love to do. This here is you could come up afterwards and see it. It's hard to see. But I found this in a little shop in Virginia where this guy takes pictures of the Holy Land. But this is the valley looking from the cliffs side of Nazareth. So this is the valley down there today and Mount Tabor over here. So if you were standing on the cliffs of Nazareth where they probably tried to throw Jesus off, this is that valley. So if you want to come up and look at that afterwards. Also, anytime you want to come up, I usually try to bring this. This kind of shows you the way the land looked, where the mountains were. Here's what they call the Jordan Rift, which is where the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea are. And you can see here's Galilee and Samaria. You can see how Jerusalem was up in the mountains, and you went down to the area of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. Cana, Nazareth on this valley here, so that's where they would have tried to throw Jesus off. You would go down the mountains to Capernaum. So if you ever want to look at these things after class, I'll have them up here. So good listening, and thank you very much. See you next week.
So, were the Gentiles ever allowed to bring sacrifices for the priests to take?
Well, I can't say for sure that they didn't. I'll turn this off. They would have